Welcome, everybody, back for another edition of the Fighters to Watch series for 2023 here on Severe MMA. I am Spencer Kite, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man. Still, as you can hear, dealing with a little bit of a sore throat horse issue. You will also potentially hear my dog Biggie in the background at some point. I apologize if you do. We're trying to teach him how to enjoy his crate. It's not quite working as well as we had hoped yet, but we got to do it every day. We do it at this time. Hopefully he hangs out. Hopefully everything goes smoothly as we run through the featherweight division in this series. So thus far, we've gone through the strawweights, the flyweights, and the bantamweights. And now we move on to just the men. And I say that, and it's no disrespect to Amanda Nunes as the featherweight champion and the handful of women that are competing at 145 pounds or have competed at 145 pounds. I just don't see the division continuing to exist. There's no one there presently that feels ready or capable of challenging Amanda Nunes for that title this year. And so until we see something from that weight class, I'm kind of leaving it aside. I do think Amanda Nunes is well suited to compete at that division, but the UFC has never invested any time or energy into really building that division. So I'm not going to invest any time or energy in this series to breaking down the 3 or 4 fighters currently listed in that weight class on the UFC roster, or, you know, whether it's Wikipedia or Zane Simon's terrific list at Bloody Elbow updating the roster. So we're going to focus on the guys. And this is a division that to me is going to be very early in 2023, very early this year in Q1. We're going to get some insights as to how this division is going to shake out, how it's going to line up in the latter half of the year, because we have the champion Alexander Volkanovski going up to challenge for the lightweight title at UFC 284 in Perth in February. We have an interim title fight between Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett slated on that card as well. It is the co-main event. So on that night, we will find out whether there is going to be a title unification bout because we crown an interim champion and Alexander Volkanovski is unsuccessful in defeating Islam Makhachev and therefore probably isn't staying at 55, or whether that interim champion is maybe going to just become the undisputed champion because Alexander Volkanovski is successful in his attempt to claim the lightweight title, stays up at 55, doesn't decide to do both. I know he has said he would like to do both, and he's capable of doing both. But I just think that the UFC, with the limited experience it has in terms of two-weight world champions, we've only seen one person go back and forth, and that was Amanda Nunes between 35 and 45. And it wasn't very often, right? She defended the featherweight title more than she defended the bantamweight title in that stretch. She hasn't defended it in a while. There are no challengers for her. Fine. But we never saw any other fighter on the male side of things win a title in a higher weight class and then go back down to defend it, right? Conor never defended the featherweight title. He never defended any title that he's won in the UFC. Henry Cejudo didn't go back down and defend the flyweight title after winning the bantamweight belt. He defended the bantamweight title and then retired. Daniel Cormier did not defend the light heavyweight title after winning the heavyweight title. He stayed at heavyweight for the fights with Derek Lewis and then the subsequent fights with Stipe Miocic. And so this is the situation we're in. I don't think Alexander Volkanovski defends both. So on that night in February in Perth, we're going to know, I think, what's going to happen. And that's going to have a ripple effect throughout the weight class, throughout the year. It's a really great division. There's some really interesting fighters coming up. Some interesting fighters that are on the way back, some members of the Contender Series class from recent years that are intriguing to me. It's a good group. There's some cool questions at 45 this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. We'll grab a sip of the honey ginseng lemon tea, and then we'll get at it. So we start, and we continue to go in alphabetical order for these. So we start with Arnold Allen, 29 years old, later this month, 19-1 overall, 10-0 in the UFC. If you have watched anything we have produced here at Severe over the last year, you know how we feel about Arnold Allen. He is the number one contender. He is already deserving of a championship opportunity in our eyes. And it is wild to me that he is not part of this interim title situation. I understand the decisions that were made. I understand how they got to these two fighters being in the interim title fight. I get it. I don't agree with it. I think Arnold Allen should be there. I think when you're 10-0 in the UFC, you should be a part of that fight. He looked great in March in London against Dan Hooker, where he came out and got a first round stoppage win to earn his 9th straight win. And then the fight with Calvin Kattar, he started well. It looked like it was going well. And then at the end of that first round, Kattar threw the jump knee, lands awkwardly, blows out his other knee, and the fight's done. The thing that's super intriguing about Arnold Allen to me is that we still don't know where his ceiling sits. Like, this is a guy that, despite all of his success, despite all the years that he's been in the UFC and 10 consecutive victories, I don't feel confident saying that this is the finished product, that this is as good as he's going to be. We haven't seen him against those absolute upper echelon fighters. And so we may not know what his ceiling is until he gets in there with Alexander Volkanovski or Brian Ortega or whoever wins this interim title fight. There could be another level to this where Arnold Allen is the very best featherweight in the world in the UFC by the end of this year. If Alexander Volkanovski wins and goes up, Arnold Allen will face the winner of that interim title fight in 2023, I believe. And I'd give him a very good chance. I would make him the favorite to win that fight against either man. He's that good. And it's actually a shame that we've taken this long to get to a point where we're advocating for Arnold Allen. Some of that is his own doing. He's not out really promoting himself. He, after the Calvin Kattar fight, he didn't say, God damn it, I want a title fight. Kind of hemmed and hawed. I got it. I understood it at the time. I still do now. And some of it has been activity. He's struggled with injuries and things of that nature. But look, he's 10-0 in the UFC. I say it on every one of these. I say it every single week. If winning that many fights in the UFC, especially in a division that is as competitive as this, against as solid of a slate of opposition as Arnold Allen has fought, was easy, more people would be on double-digit win streaks. They're not, which tells you how good he is and how much he deserves a bigger opportunity. Next up, Daniel Argueta. He is a tough 29 contestant who showed well in his short notice debut against Damon Jackson last year. A lot of people may remember him as the guy that spoke for Cub Swanson at Cub Swanson's last media engagement prior to his bantamweight debut. Now he gets a full camp facing newcomer Isaac Dulgarian later this month. I believe next week. I believe on the opening card of the year. He was unbeaten before he faced Damon Jackson. He is a quintessential let's just see guy. I liked what I saw from him on The Ultimate Fighter. I think he did well, as I said, in that fight with Damon Jackson, who is a seasoned vet at 34, been through all the things you could be through, has a good skill set in terms of his grappling. So let's just see. He gets a chance here against another guy that is brand new to the UFC, and Dulgarian. Just wait and see. Don't need to make a decision yet. I'm curious to see what he looks like. Let's just let the fight happen and make some assessments afterwards. Next up, Melsik Bagdasaryan. 31 years old later this month. 7-1 overall, 2-0 in the UFC's, won 7 straight. So, Contender Series graduate. He withdrew from a pair of fights in 2022, so he hasn't fought in over a year. He's scheduled to fight Joshua Kulibau at UFC 284 in Perth. He's a good striker. He was at one point managed by Ronda Rousey and her team at One Fight Management. We just still don't know where he fits in MMA. He's fought 2 Contender Series alums, I believe. It's a limited sample size situation. And the fact that he missed an entire year right in the midst of his prime doesn't give me a lot of hope for his upside. I think he's going to be limited in how far he can go. but the striking's really good. He's really dangerous in terms of his Muay Thai, in terms of his striking arsenal. And so if he can get back, if this fight in February can be the first of 3 this year, then maybe we're going to get some answers and maybe we're going to get a better understanding of where he fits. But until we get there, he's just a giant question mark. I like paying attention to question marks, but I like getting answers on those guys more. And so I hope I get some answers on Bagdasaryan later this year. He looked good in his first 2 wins. Full marks to him, full credit to him. Looked good in those wins. Let's just see some more. Let's see him step up against a little bit more savvy, a little bit more experienced opposition and see what we have. Joe Anderson Britu, member of the class of 21 on Dana White's Contender Series, 28 in February, 14-3-1 overall, 2-1 in the UFC. He's won his last 2. So he debuted in January of last year, losing to Bill Algeo, comes back and knocks out Andre Fili, then gets a win over Lucas Alexander as a short notice opponent after that. Both of those are first round finishes. It looks like there's something there with him. Initial impressions, first 3 fights, it looks like there's something there. The comeback right away from the loss to Algeo to finish Andre Fili and then also get the finish, do the thing that you're supposed to do if you have upside against a short notice opponent like Lucas Alexander, as he did later in the year, is promising. It sets off a little trigger for me of, okay, these are good things. But he's a classic, just get more fights. Just get him more fights. Get him 2 more, 3 more this year. Right? He turns 28 next month. So he's still right at the start of his prime. Get him 3 fights this year. Give us a 6-fight sample to draw from. And then we'll know. Then we'll have a greater sample size to make our assessments from. If he's 5-1 and he's continuing to work his way up the food chain, that tells us one thing. If he's 3-2 and things don't necessarily go that well this year, that's something else. So let's just see more. Stay active, stay healthy, show us that there's more there. Brings us to Giga Chikadze, who is 14-3 overall, 7-1 in the UFC, but coming off his first loss. So he was in the first main event of last year against Calvin Kattar, landed on the wrong side of things, didn't fight again, withdrew from a fight in September against Sadiq Youssef that I was really looking forward to seeing. And so the reason I'm so interested in seeing Giga this year is I just want to see how he responds to that first UFC loss. And it was a bad loss, in my opinion, at that. Not in the way that he looked terrible, but just he got handled. He got shown a little bit that he's not ready to be on that championship level, right? Going into that fight, he was talking about, why is Alexander Volkanovski ducking me? I'm the guy that should be fighting for a title. And I know from talking to Calvin Kattar, it pissed him off. I know from talking to Calvin's team, it pissed all of them off, and Cal went out and was like, you're not ready to fight for anything yet, dude. You can't beat me. Here, have this. And so there's no easy fights given where he's at. And I don't think he had an easy road to where he is, because Edson Barbosa is not an easy road. Cub Swanson is not an easy road. But those are the ones that mean the most to me, is those last 3. And so he's 2-1 in those last 3. He's not ready to be top 5. Let's see what that loss does. Does it galvanize him and make him double down and really want to prove that he's still top 10, that he's deserving of that spot? Or is it, all right, now the run is ended and we'll just have some fun and maybe we don't stick around the top 10? Because we haven't seen him again since, right? Those things are important to me. I really would have, it's a little telling to me that we don't have a Q1 fight announced yet. So I don't know if there's any injuries, and if there are, Giga, please get healthy. All due respect if there are, and I just don't know about them. Haven't seen anything about it. And so it's a little telling to me that he doesn't have a fight book. I don't know if that's waiting for the proper opponent, kind of trying to cherry pick things, nobody being out there, a bunch of people declining, whatever it may be. I really want to see him get a fight booked, because he didn't look great and he needs to bounce back. And this is just the way it is. This division is in a position that when you're out for a year, when you're out for 8-9 months, even a bunch of guys pass over you. A bunch of guys just move past you. And it's hard to come back from that. A bunch of guys have passed Giga now. Maybe not in the rankings, but in terms of our level of excitement for them and how much we want to see them. And so get a fight booked and let's see what's up. Move to one half of the interim title fight in February. Josh Emmett, 37 years old, 18-2 overall, 9-2 in the UFC, a 5-fight winning streak. Those are terrific numbers. Merits his spot in the interim title fight with Yair Rodriguez. Merits that opportunity. You can't look at what he's done and the wins he's put up, whether you agree with the decision in the Calvin Kattar fight last year in Austin, Texas or not. He got the win. He has won 5 straight. He merits this opportunity. He's a big power guy, but low volume. And then there's little else. And that's the piece that's really interesting to me about Josh Emmett every time he steps into the cage. He's a guy that can change the course of a fight with one good shot. We've seen it many times, a number of times, probably 7 times in those 9 UFC wins. I just don't know whether this is something that he can continue at his age, given the injury issues in the past, given the style. We are coming into an age, and Harry talks about this all the time on the takeaways. We are coming into a class of fighters and a generation of fighters like Arman Tsarukyan, Movsar Evloev, Ilia Topuria, that are so well-rounded and technical and powerful and dangerous in every facet that guys that are fairly, and I don't say one-dimensional in a like, he doesn't have anything else. Josh Emmett can wrestle. He just chooses not to. And so if you're a guy that's going out there and just looking for big power shots, I don't know how you fit, where you fit in the current UFC landscape. Now, obviously, Josh Emmett has continued to have success. He's a hard guy to beat. But I think this is going to be a very telling year. I like the fight against Rodriguez for him in terms of the ability to land some of his shots and get a guy that's going to stand with him. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of wrestling in this fight, but I just don't know long-term sort of what's left for Josh Emmett. If he can get a win and get gold in sort of these, I don't want to say halcyon days of his, or glory days, of final days of his career, to finally land on the right word I was looking for, but he's 37. You don't have a lot of fighters that are 37, 38 years old, winning titles, defending titles, continuing to stay on top. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in Australia and then what happens after that. Next up is Movsar Evloev, who I mentioned a little bit there earlier. 29 in February, 16-0 overall, 6-0 in the UFC. He outclassed Danny Gay in June. And it was a fight that, if you remember, you go back and listen to the takeaways. Harry and I both came on here and were just like, okay, that was even better than I expected. We expected it to be a competitive fight. And it's not that it wasn't, it's just that it wasn't as competitive as we anticipate it being. Evloev is the real deal. The only thing right now that is limiting him or holding him back is just availability. He's been scratched from a bunch of fights. He's kind of injury prone. Things happen to him that he doesn't make it to the octagon. He was supposed to fight Bryce Mitchell before Ilia Topuria tagged in and did what he did to Bryce Mitchell. So that would have been his opportunity to step forward and shine. And I don't know that it necessarily goes the same way, but the talent is there for it to have gone the same way. He is skilled enough to be a top 5 fighter. If he can get 2-3 fights this year, he'll be knocking on the door of the top 5. We could have a huge amount of change in this division in 2023. A bunch of those established names that are up at the top and throughout the top 15 could get juggled, could get moved around. We don't know where Volkanovski is going to end up. Going to talk about Max Holloway next. Brian Ortega's on the sidelines. Josh Emmett, as I just said, 37 years old. There's room for change. Evloev is one of the guys that is going to ascend at some point as long as he is healthy. This feels like a defining year. Arnold Allen is ahead of him. Ilia Topuria has moved ahead of him. He needs to stay healthy. I want to see him compete at least 2 times. Big fights, good opportunities. Let's see what happens. Brings us to the former champion, Max Holloway. As I said, he is the unquestioned number 2 in the featherweight division. I'm just not sure what's next. He hasn't fought since the 3rd fight with Alexander Volkanovski. There hasn't been talk of anything. There hasn't been mention of anything. He could very well hang out through February, see if Volkanovski leaves and decide, okay, that guy's gone. I'm next best. One of those dudes has a belt. I've beaten one of them already. Let me go beat whoever has that belt and get back on the throne. Very reasonable, very understandable opportunity and potential avenue. He could also decide to move up to lightweight full-time, right? He went at one point and challenged Dustin Poirier for the interim title, where he just sort of meandered up. He could decide, I'm going to lightweight and do it the right way, adding to his frame, adding functional muscle, getting to a point where he makes that weight cut and approaches it the way he has approached featherweight thus far. He's still clearly dangerous. He's still talented. The other question I have is, are the years starting to add up a little bit? Alexander Volkanovski was head and shoulders better than him in the 3rd fight. And it's been a while since we haven't really seen anybody head and shoulders above Max Holloway in 7 years, 8 years since he started his winning streak. Probably since the fight with Conor McGregor all those years ago in Boston. And so is that a function of Volk is just that much better and has gotten that much better? Are the years and the miles and all of these wars and all of these long fights starting to take a toll on Max Holloway? Was he a little bit just, maybe not all that interested, excuse me, in a 3rd fight with Volk, which doesn't seem to be the case? So I want to see what Max chooses to do and what the UFC has for him if he opts to stick around and if he opts to go up. Harry hit me up yesterday and said, we were talking about Arnold Allen, or this morning we were talking about Arnold Allen and what comes next and sort of different matchup opportunities and how does he match up with the guys in the interim title. And he said, could it be Max Holloway and Arnold Allen at that pay-per-view in London as the co-main event or the 3rd fight on the main card? And I said, I hope not, because that's a tough fight. It's not that I don't think Arnold Allen can win that fight. It's one, I don't want Arnold Allen to have to go through that gauntlet. I talk about this all the time. We talk about this all the time. I'm sick of seeing fighters get to 8, 9, 10 wins and then still have to face the former champion and the guy that just lost for the championship opportunity in order to get their own. He shouldn't have to do that. Additionally, Max Holloway is a tough out. The only guy that's beaten him is Alex Volkanovski, who is in the last number of years, who is the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world and challenging for the lightweight title later. And so we'll see what happens. Really interested to see. He's been active on social media lately, but he hasn't said anything about his fighting career. So we'll see what's up with Blessed and move forward from there. Brings me to Damon Jackson. 34-year-old Damon Jackson, 22-4-1 with 1 no contest for his career, 5-2-1 with that no contest in the UFC, but he's won 4 straight. He's on a nice little run here. Had a really great emotional win over Pat Sabatini last time out, just a couple days after the passing of his brother. Adopted the Action Jackson nickname in tribute to his brother. He is sticking with that. He's a guy to me that, man, it's really interesting to me seeing this resurgence, right? Because for a while, he was the guy that washed out of the UFC relatively quickly in his first run. Then he went to the PFL and he was on the wrong end of one of the nastiest knockouts early in their run of things, where he got hit with that flying knee seconds into the first round of his fight, and that was it. But since he's been back, it's been a really nice little run. It's been really good. He's 5-1 in this run, and the loss is Ilia Topuria, and we're never going to get mad at people losing to Ilia Topuria. The curious thing to me is whether there is further room to grow, or like further upside that he can explore here or move forward here. He fights Dan Ige next week. Dan Ige is still ranked in the top 15, as he should be. Dangerous, quality veteran. This is a great fight. It's the co-main event on next weekend's first card of the year. And if he wins that, he's ranked. And then he's facing some of these young kids again and some of these established veterans that have been sticking around, the Edson Barbosas of the world. This is a great story. I love this. I'm probably going to reach out to Damon Jackson in the next couple of days to see if we can't have a conversation about this resurgence and about everything that's going on for him, because it's great. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing him compete on Saturday. What happens there will dictate where things go for him the rest of this year, obviously. But I want good things for Damon Jackson. It's great to see this run. It was great to see that emotional win over Pat Sabatini. Let's see if he can continue it next Saturday. Next up is Charles Jourdain, 27 years old, 4-5-1 in the UFC, and he's lost his last two. He's on here in part probably because I have a soft spot for Charles Jourdain as a fellow Canadian, as a guy I've gotten to know a little bit here over the last couple of years, speaking to him regularly before his fights. It's also because we've seen flashes of brilliance, right? We've seen the Doo Ho Choi fight. We've seen the quick finish of Lando Venata last year. We've seen the willingness to step up last January when Ilya Topuria needed an opponent, and he just quickly threw up his hand a couple weeks after beating Andre Ewell and kind of maintaining his place in the UFC, maintaining his spot on the roster and saying, yep, I'll fight that guy that nobody wants to fight. It didn't happen, but props to that. Kudos for that. He's a little undersized for the division, if I'm being completely honest, just in terms of his physical stature. Height-wise, length-wise, reach-wise, all of those things are fine, but just the stature of him, he's not a big, thick, full, broad-shouldered human being. So he feels a little bit undersized. He's always going to be in entertaining fights because he doesn't know any other way to compete, which is also probably part of his downfall and part of what limits him. But he's 27, so he's just hitting his prime. And now 4-5-1 in the UFC is probably a little too far on the not great result side for me to be able to sit here and be like, we've seen guys in this position turn it around and have great runs, because I don't think it's quite been that bad before. But can he put together a bunch of fun fights and win some entertaining battles as he gets a little bit of a step back in competition this year, I'm assuming, and kind of develop some of these things that he needs to develop, shore up some of the holes in his game? Probably. And regardless, I'm here for it. My guy Spartan kicked Andre Ewell to like literally on time at the end of the round, at the end of their fight in December 2021. I'm here for it. I'm here for every Charles Jourdain fight. You should be too. Next up is Calvin Kattar, who is sidelined currently after suffering a knee injury in the fight with Arnold Allen, as I mentioned, but he's still a big part of that upper tier in this weight class. He's 35 at the end of March, 23-7 overall, 7-5 in the UFC, lost 2 straight. But like, you look at this slate of fighters this guy has fought, there's a handful of athletes that we talk about in terms of the schedules they fought. Rafael Dos Anjos is one. Calvin Kattar is another for me. Like, it's just Edson Barbosa is another. It's just tough guy after tough guy. There's no layups in this. I think the only one you could look at and go, one of these things, the Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other, is probably Chris Fishgold, who's a good fighter. But like, you then look at everybody else that Calvin Kattar has fought, and it's like, oh, they're all ranked fighters. Really hasn't fought many unranked guys. And so, yeah, 7-5 isn't a great result. Maybe if you give him that win over Josh Emmett, it's 8-4. It looks a little bit better. He's a tough son of a bitch. He'll be back. To me, he feels like the perfect gatekeeper in this division. And I know Cal and the team won't like that designation because nobody wants to just be saddled with that and told that they're not going to be a champion. I don't think he gets there. We've seen him against Max Holloway. It didn't work out. We've seen him against Zabit Magomed Sharapov back when Zabit was on the rise. It didn't work out. Now, if that was a 5-round fight, maybe it's different, but still, what's done is done. We saw him even against Josh Emmett. It was a close fight. I scored the fight for him. I thought he won the fight, but it still wasn't a going away landslide victory. And so probably not quite all the way to the very best level in this division, but he's not far behind. And that to me makes him the perfect guy at the top end of this. The bouncer at the VIP, right? There's the guy that's standing at the front of the top 15, who's the guy at the front door, lets you into the club. And then there's the guy at the VIP with the clipboard and a whole nother list that just goes, nah. As we said with his fight with Giga last year, he stood there at the door and Giga was like, let me in, I'm next. Nah, you're not. Get well soon, Cal. Get back here. Look forward to seeing you compete. Love watching him fight. Keep paying attention. Brings us to Francis Marshall, 24 years old, turns 24 in March, I should say. 7-0 overall, 1-0 in the UFC, member of the class of 22 from Dana White's Contender Series. He had a beautiful second round knockout win in his debut against a tough vet in Marcelo Hoyo. It was a fight that we were talking about on the preview show, asking whether it was too much too soon for a kid that's just getting started. Now, a kid that comes from a good camp and is getting good coaching from Kurt Pellegrino, former UFC fighter, who has good size, who looks the part. He showed it wasn't too much too soon. Showed a lot of poise in that fight. And those are things that you can't teach, right? The first round was a little uneven, but it's his first round in the UFC and he's 24 years old. Like, we'll give you that one. You can have that. And then he came out in the second round and was just like, cool. Check right hook. You go to sleep. Those things are impressive. I talked about it yesterday with Cameron Saman. The intangible pieces, if you have them at this young age, it's all well and good to have the athleticism, and it's certainly important. And it's important to show technical abilities and a diverse skill set. But the things for me that are going to separate young fighters are those intangibles. How do you react in moments? How do you react to situations? How do you react when things aren't going well? He showed he reacts well. Marshall showed that he understands staying calm, staying poised, staying centered, sticking to what he does best. He's a really interesting addition to this division. He is on, for me, this is a like 3-4 years and then we'll reassess. And I don't mean that in that we're not paying attention every step of the way. And if he really starts showing out, we can't hustle him forward. It's just, let's not go crazy here. Like I talked about yesterday with Chito Vera. It took Chito 8 years to get into the top 5 at bantamweight and become this fully formed version of who he is now and really develop and round out his style of fighting inside the octagon. So to sit here and want to see Francis Marshall develop that and get to that in a year or two is just asking too much. It's putting too much on these young athletes. And so let's go 3 years. Let's see them get 7, 6, 8, 10 fights and then make an assessment. See how they play out. Read and react. Each fight that comes, process them, see what they tell us, keep figuring it out. Not going to have a final idea on this kid for a number of years, and that's okay to me. That's perfectly okay to me. Give them time. Brings me to Bryce Mitchell, who's really fascinating, and I didn't get a chance to watch the interview that Brett Okamoto put out with Bryce Mitchell today, which is Thursday, January 5th, as I'm taping this, where I'm sure he talked about a number of the things I'm going to mention here, like the fact that he talked about retirement after his loss to Ilia Topuria last month. He's 28 years old. He's 15-2 overall. He's 7-1 in the UFC. I know you want to tell me that he's 15-1. I hate to tell you this. I hate that I know this and that is a thing that I have to remember as I write about these athletes. Those fights in the tough house count. They count. I know we spent a lot of years being told they're exhibitions. They don't count. They don't contribute to records. They're listed differently on Tapology and on Wikipedia. And I don't even think they're listed in SureDog. They count. That loss to Brad Katona in the house in the semifinals counted. So he wasn't undefeated going into Topuria. He was undefeated in the UFC, but he's neither of those things anymore. That fight, we talked about it coming out of that fight on the takeaways. That fight wasn't an indictment of Bryce Mitchell not being good. That fight was all about Ilia Topuria being even better than we thought he was. That wasn't Mitchell can't hang in this division and doesn't deserve to be ranked. It was Ilia Topuria has championship potential. And so what I'm looking forward to, and I will go once I'm done taping this and listen to the interview with Brett to see what was said and where he's at going into this year, is that I just want to see him come back because I think there's a lot of opportunities for him to thrive. He's a really good fighter. He's really talented. And so I'm just curious to see where his head is at, what his outlook is for this year, how far he's walked back that I'm going to retire if that's the case, because I think he still has the ability to really have success and be a foundational part of this division for the next several years if that's what he chooses. Brings me to Lerone Murphy. Really fascinating fighter to me. 31 years old, 11-0-1 overall, 3-0-1 in the UFC, won his last three. Debuted with a draw against Zubaira Tukhugov in Abu Dhabi a number of years ago and has won his last three. Last time out, his last fight was a knockout win over Makwan Amirkhani. He didn't fight in 2022. He was booked to fight in March in Columbus, Ohio. That came apart. He wasn't booked again. He's one of these athletes for me that has a ton of upside, but all of the momentum that he had is now gone because he hasn't fought in over a year. And others have passed him by. As I said earlier, if you're out for any pronounced amount of time in this weight class, there's 2 or 3 guys in the span of 3 months that are coming for your spot and pushing you back out of the spotlight. And when you're out for a year, more than a year, it's hard to maintain that time in the spotlight and that prominence in people's minds. To me, Murphy needs to be on the fight card in London in March. That's where he has to return. There's no visa issues for him to fight on that card because he is a British citizen. That's where he is from. He will get, I would hope, the welcome that most of these British athletes have gotten as they've walked out in London over these last couple of events and historically throughout different events there. And so get him on that card. If he has to take a step back, if it has to be a little bit of a reset because he's been out for so long, fine, accept it, take it, and just try to roll with it. Turn this into a year where you make up for lost time. I would love to see him not have to take that step back because the finish of Amirkhani was great and he's undefeated in the UFC and he's undefeated overall. And he's 31, so let's just see what's up. Let's just see where he fits right now. But get him on that card in London and then get him another fight within the next 4 months, 5 months, provided health. Because I think he has the capabilities of being somebody that is a factor in this division that we have to pay attention to. He just needs to be active. He just needs a chance to fight. Next up is David Onama, 10-2 overall, 2-2 in the UFC, coming off a wild fight with Nate Landwehr. Just a sloppy, wild, chaotic, quintessential Nate Landwehr fight. There's clear upside, but there are clear holes. We saw them in the Landwehr fight. And now we're going to see which of those two things sort of win the day, right? The upside is the stuff we saw against Gabriel Benitez and ultimately the finishing ability against Garrett Armfield in his second win. The holes, the downside is what we saw against Landwehr. There's just some sloppiness, some technical things that need to be really cleaned up, an understanding of how to use his length and his reach, and that he doesn't have to go 100% all of the time. That's going to be important for him to figure out. The tricky thing here is that David Onama is another one of these fighters that is impacted by the James Krause situation. Trains at Glory MMA and Fitness in Lee's Summit, Missouri, or Kansas City, Missouri, wherever it's located. And so here's a kid that has been in that gym for a number of years, whose head coach is no longer eligible to corner fighters in the UFC at present for an indefinite amount of time. Depending on how this thing's out, maybe never again. And so coming off a loss when he needs to bounce back, this young, talented, but sort of stuck at a crossroads fighter also has to deal with, well, who's going to fucking coach me? There's a lot to this James Krause situation. I haven't dove into it because I'm kind of just letting everything play out and waiting to see a little bit more of what we hear. I think it deserves to be considered and talked about as more than just the James Krause situation, because I think it will ultimately, when we learn about it, run way deeper than just that fight. But the Krause piece of it, given the number of athletes in the UFC and elsewhere that are in that gym that put their faith and their trust and their livelihood in his hands, that are now suffering for his decisions, is really difficult to contend with and really difficult to see, because there's some really good fighters in there. And even if they weren't good fighters, they don't deserve this shit. Onama was supposed to fight next week. He was pulled due to an injury to his opponent. Hasn't been rebooked. Hopefully he gets something in the first quarter. Now that he's, now that fight was there, let's get him on another one of these cards. I hope for everybody in that gym that shit gets resolved quickly, that they figure things out, whether that's Jason High stepping up, whether that's someone else stepping up, whether that's them moving to other gyms. I hope this gets figured out pretty soon, because there's some good talent in there. And there's some fighters that need these opportunities and have opportunities that are going to be suffering right now for stuff that they had no part of, as far as we know. From that downer of a note to a much more happy one. Jonathan Pierce, 30 years old, 14-4 overall, 5-1 in the UFC, but most importantly, 5-0 since moving to featherweight. Started his career at lightweight. I say it every time I talk about this guy because it's just wild to me, right? Comes off Contender Series. It's a good win on the Contender Series to get his contract. And then for his debut, he's up at 55 in Boston against Joe Lozon. Just, hey, kid, go swim in the deep end. And I know that Joe Lozon isn't contender anymore, but Joe Lozon in his backyard in your UFC debut, it wasn't ever going to go anyway other than how it went. So Pierce has subsequently moved down and looked very good. Very, very good. He's the full package. He's got the whole skill set. He's got a good team. He's a good fighter, training with the Fight Ready guys out in Arizona. It's time for him to face a ranked opponent. He's had a bunch of very good performances against fighters that are just outside of that in that second 15, most recently beaten the holy hell out of Darren Elkins in a fight that should have been stopped. It's time to get this kid a step up in competition. He's very good. And I know calling him a kid when he's 30 is maybe disrespectful. So it's time to get this man a step up in competition. Excuse me. Next up, Ricardo Ramos, 27 years old, 16-4 overall, 7-3 in the UFC, but just 3-2 in the featherweight division. He is consistently inconsistent. For every flash of brilliance, there are an equal number of flashes of what the Christ are you doing, right? He tries that little step behind kick, and yes, I'm doing the kick behind my one leg under my desk right now. That makes no sense to me. It's not going to do any damage. All it's going to do is put you off balance. Sorry for that. As it says in my notes, he's a guy that tries to do too much at times, and it leads to mistakes. It leads to bad opportunity, bad misses and opportunities for his opponents. It also, though, leads to the spinning back elbows. And the one he landed on Danny Chavez last year was an absolute thing of beauty. Spinning back elbows. And I wrote about this when I talked about some of my favorite knockouts of last year. Spinning back elbows are usually kind of in the flow of things moves, right? You think of Molly McCann's on Luana Carolina in London. It's just in the midst of everything, as I smash my microphone, in the midst of everything, you're going with your momentum and you just throw it. Ramos against Danny Chavez was 100%. I am setting this up and throwing this. He dipped low, got Chavez to bite and dip his hands, and just came around. And it was clean. It was to the temple. It wasn't the first time he's done it. Those are the things that have me still interested in this man, even though he's just 3-2 in this division. Those flashes of upside are there. I want to see if he can harness it. He's been here long enough that we've probably gotten the answer already. The answer is probably no, but he's still only 27. And so before I go closing the door, I just want to give him one more chance to see if he can harness it. Give him this year. If he can build on that win over Chavez, get a couple more wins, cut out some of the nonsense, find some consistency, we'll see. It could be interesting. Next up, the other half of the interim title fight at UFC 284 in Perth, Yair Rodriguez. I get why he's there. I get why he's in that fight. I don't like it, but I get it. He is a name that the UFC has been trying to push, market, build, spotlight from the minute he walked into the UFC. Throughout his career, he has been someone that they have hoped would rise to this level and would get to this level. Is he getting a little extra push here? Is he getting a little extra like, let's just help you up there, son? Yeah, he probably shouldn't be fighting for an interim title off of a win over Brian Ortega, where Brian Ortega dislocated his shoulder and nothing else happened in that fight. It's not as if we got 4 rounds of dominant Yair Rodriguez, and then in the 5th, Brian Ortega dislocated his shoulder. It happened in the first round where not a lot happened. And so it feels a little janky, but I get it. What I want to see is active, consistent, really locked in Yair Rodriguez. I would argue that we haven't seen that since, I would say, before the Frankie Edgar fight, right? Where he went down UFC 211 in Dallas, comes off the BJ Penn win, main events that card, beats BJ Penn, continues this good run in the UFC. Big step up in competition against Frankie Edgar. Frankie beats the holy hell out of him, cuts the hole there, levels to this promo afterwards. And since then, it's been hit or miss for Rodriguez. Periods where he's not fighting, periods where he's fighting with the UFC, periods where he looks great, some good performances in there, right? The up elbow against Chan Sung Jung, phenomenal. But the win over Jeremy Stevens wasn't great. He himself told me last year when I spoke to him before the fight with Ortega that he didn't think the fight with Max Holloway was that good of a performance from his end, as much as we all thought it was pretty solid. And so I want to see early UFC Yair Rodriguez. He was dynamic. He was incredible. He seemed understandably to be pushed and understandably to be projected as a future champion. This guy we've seen of late, I don't think is there. And we're going to see what happens in February against Josh Emmett, who's going to come out and try to take his head off. Going to come out, and if Yair Rodriguez leaves his chin in the air or is too happy to get into a slugfest, he's going to go to sleep. Josh Emmett has that kind of power. Now, Yair could absolutely do some crazy shit and knock out Josh Emmett. We've seen Josh Emmett get knocked out. We've seen Josh Emmett down and out on the canvas. And so anything could happen there. Give me locked in Yair Rodriguez. Give me a year of locked in Yair Rodriguez. Give me 3 fights, dialed in, best version of him that we've seen in a number of years, and I will be a happy man. Next up is Jack Shore, who currently is sidelined after suffering a knee injury. He lost for the first time in his amateur or professional career, in his fighting career last year to Ricky Simone. He has indicated that when he does return from this knee injury, he will move up to 45. I'm not sure what the future holds for Jack Shore. Very high on him when he was competing at bantamweight, but I don't know where he fits and how he fits in this division, in part because we haven't seen it, but also because I think he's a little bit limited athletically. And as I talked about earlier on, I think there's a generation of fighters that are on the come up that are just so athletically gifted on top of all the skills that they have, that guys like Jack Shore that are technicians are going to be limited in how far they can go. Now, if you're world class and a world class technician and all the intangibles are there and you're durable and you're smart and your fight IQ is off the charts, fine. Beneil Dariush is a perfect example, right? A guy that is just, you look at Benny and you think he's not as good an athlete as Matoish Gamrot, and he's not, but he's smart. He's got great fight IQ. He made great reads and great adjustments. If Jack Shore can get there, great. Just not sure. First and foremost, heal up, get better, rehab the knee, and then let's see where you fit in. Brings us to Ilia Topuria. Good Lord, I love this guy. 26 in a couple of weeks, 13-0 in the UFC, 5-0 overall. He's a future champ if he can avoid getting into fistfights in arcades in Spain. Everybody saw the video by this point. I'm sure if you are watching a Fighters to Watch in 2023 video on the Severe MMA YouTube page, first and foremost, thank you. I love you. I appreciate you. Secondly, that video of Topuria getting into it with a Spanish musician in an arcade a couple days ago crossed your timeline, because you and I have the same timelines, and it crossed my timeline. He absolutely dominated Bryce Mitchell in December. Looked phenomenal, and started the year with a knockout win at lightweight against Jai Herbert, where he got rocked in the first round and showed that he can fight wisely to protect himself and get his wits about him and then come back and have success. He has everything you want from a guy in the position he's in, right? There's a number of years left of his prime. Good everywhere. Skilled, talented, powerful, dangerous, submissions, the full complement of skills and tools for in the cage. And he's got, I said it before the fight with Mitchell, he's got a little bit of that international bad boy villain to him, where he was walking around in the white tank top and you can see the tattoo and there's a chain and the well-manicured beard. Like, my guy has the chance to be international bad boy, Ilia Topuria, UFC featherweight champion. And it might happen as soon as this year. He's that good. I want to see him in there fighting for the title. If not this year, next year for sure. He's that good. He's going to have, there's still a couple more fights before he gets there, right? We've got the situation, Volkanovski, interim title, Arnold Allen ahead of him. Fine. Beat Bryce Mitchell. Great win. Now you're in the top 10. So there's 2 more fights. If he can get those 2 fights this year, maintain this winning streak, get it to 15-0, get it to 7-0 in the UFC, he can fight for gold in the first half of 2024. And depending on who's got the belt, I might pick him to win. January 2023, I'm telling you right now, a year from now, I might pick Ilia Topuria to win the title. He's that good. Pay attention. Brings us to the current champion, Alexander Volkanovski, who is also really, really good. Best pound for pound fighter in the sport, in my estimation. I have been writing it for a number of years. Alexander the Great is Alexander the Greatest to me. He's still underrated, in my opinion, given how good he is. He's 25-1 overall. He's 12-0 in the UFC. He has won a preposterous 22 consecutive fights. 22 straight trips into the cage. Hand raised. And you want to say, he didn't beat Max Holloway. The record says he did. Get over it already. It wasn't a robbery. There are very few robberies in this sport in reality, as Sean has talked about regularly, as we've told you on this platform in general a number of times. Fights Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title at UFC 284 in Perth. There's no holes. He's still improving. We saw that in the fights with Chan Sung Jung and with Max Holloway last year, where he looked absolutely phenomenal in both. He was my fighter of the year because of that. As a result of that, lightweight might be too much. It might just be a case of Makhachev being a little bit too big, a little bit too strong, a little bit too technical, too gifted, too good in every facet. But he's unmatched at featherweight right now. I mentioned earlier that Harry and I were talking about the next steps for Arnold Allen as I was putting this all together this morning. And we said, how does he do against either of the guys fighting for the interim title? And we had a consensus agreement. And then he said, how does he do against Volk? And I just kind of sent to like, yeah, no. Because I don't think anybody in this division beats Alexander Volkanovski yet. Wry smile for Ilya Topuria. God, I'd like to see that fight next year. Would that be fun? Volk's just good, man. He's just that good. I love that he's getting his opportunity. It's one of those situations to me where, as much as I wish he was still fighting at featherweight and defending his title against Arnold Allen in Perth, I understand this. He has done enough in this division with the guys he's faced, with the way he's beaten them, to merit this chance. And to have it happen in Perth, it's too good to pass up. So I get it. We'll see what happens in February. See if Volk ends up coming back. If he does, it's going to be a lot of fun. There's some good fights for him still at featherweight. Next up, 3 left. William Gomis, 25-year-old Parisian fighter, 11-2 overall, won his UFC debut at UFC Paris. He's won 9 straight overall. That fight in Paris was sort of uneven. It wasn't his best effort, but as my note says, whatever. It's his UFC debut on home soil. It's a huge moment. He's 25. He got his hand raised. That's it. That's what mattered. Now, from a betting perspective, I remember putting a bunch of units on him to get a finish and to beat Jarno Ahrens handily. That didn't happen, but got the win. First one's done and out of the way. Cool. Now let's see what he can do. He had really strong results on the regional scene. Bunch of finishes. The guys that have seen him compete more regularly all say good things about him. His coach, Fernand Lopez, now obviously his coach is going to say good things about him, but his coach and his teammates say good things about him. So let's just see. He's 25. Get him in there, get him a couple of fights, get him a little bit more experience this year. And similar to what we said with Francis Marshall, similar to what we said yesterday about Cameron Saman, we just build. And each fight, we make reads, we make assessments, we develop our ideas further, we test these hypotheses, and we figure it out as we go. He's a long way off from being a finished product and being at a point where we should be making decisions about him and having full-fledged ideas about who he is as an athlete. Just give him time. Next up, Nathaniel Wood, 29 years old, 19-5 overall, 6-2 in the UFC, 2-0 since moving to featherweight. Returned from a long layoff early last year, to go 2-0, beating Charles Rosa and Charles Jourdain. He's making it work despite being a little bit undersized for the division, because he's actually, the fight with Jourdain was really telling. It was part of what made me think Jourdain is a little bit undersized for the division, because Nathaniel Wood is shorter, gives up a couple inches of height, but doesn't give up that much reach, and looked in that fight the broader, stronger, more physical man. And so he's a real intriguing addition to this division to me, and real curious to see what comes next for him. Those are 2 good wins over the Charleses last year. He's another one of these athletes that should very much be on that card in March. I know myself and Harry and everybody here is trying to reach out to Nathaniel to see what's up, to see if he is on that card. I think he should be. I think he should be facing a top 15 foe if possible, just to see, right? Get him out there, give him a little bit of an underdog chance to get the crowd really on his side. So whether that's Jonathan Pierce, whether that's Edson Barbosa, find somebody for him to dance with in London in March. Get him on that card. Last one before we get out of here, Sadiq Youssef, 29 years old, 13-2 overall. 6-1 in the UFC. He's won his last 2. The only loss is to Arnold Allen in the UFC. He's right there with Movsar Evloev in that cut just behind Arnold Allen and Ilia Topuria. He beat Alex Caceres in March and then went out and handled his business a week after Giga Chikadze withdrew against Don Shainis. Got him out of there in like 34 seconds, just jumped Gilly. Away we go. He's another guy that he needs another top 15 assignment. He was going to have it against Giga. I loved that fight. I was really looking forward to that fight because I think Sadiq Youssef is a much better grappler than people understand. And don't look at that Don Shainis fight and just go, well, he beat some. No. My guy can grapple. He's a legit grappler. Personal feelings for Lloyd Irvin aside, scumminess of Lloyd Irvin aside, he's taught Sadiq Youssef to be a very good grappler. He's also a extremely talented, extremely polished striker. I think he is somebody that has a chance to make some noise in this division this year. Said earlier on that we could get a lot of movement and a lot of change in the top 15. I would not at all be surprised to see Sadiq Youssef in the top 10 this time next year. I think he's that talented. The right matchups, the right opportunities, good health, he will get there. That's it for the featherweights. So we're 4 divisions down. We move on tomorrow to what will be, I'm telling you now, the longest of these videos because it is lightweight, because there are so many fighters in the division. It is a long list of athletes that we will go through, but I'm looking forward to going through it with you. I have enjoyed doing these thus far. As I say at the end of these every time, this is my passion. This is my heart for this sport put out before you. I hope you are enjoying it. I appreciate you tuning in. Please sign up for the Patreon, SevereMMA.com/pints. Best URL in the business. Costs you $5. Go sign up for it. You get loads of great content. I will be back tomorrow. We're just going straight through. No breaks. Sickness isn't stopping me. Weekends aren't stopping me. We're just rolling on. So we'll be back with the lightweights tomorrow. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you tune in. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another.